And on that note, I'm going to introduce Julian. So Julian Cribb, he's an author, a journalist and a science communicator. He runs a specialist consultancy in communication around science, agriculture, food, mining, energy and environment. He's a futurist, and today he'll be sharing his views on what the future state of food and agriculture will be in Australia. And one other point to stress is he was a graduate at the University of WA. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you, Tristan. Ladies and gentlemen, I also cut my teeth as an agricultural journalist here in Perth 44 years ago. Gosh, it sounds a long time. First, a health warning. The early messages in my talk are somewhat disturbing. If you feel short of oxygen, little yellow masks will fall from the roof. If you're really in trouble, I've got a defibrillator at the front desk. The second part of the talk, however, is much more cheerful, and I'm sure you will look forward to that. So, food is poised to change, more profoundly than in any era of human history. What we eat a century from now, how we produce and consume it, its health value and composition will be as strange to us today as our own ancestors would find the modern diet in this, the era of cosmopolitan cuisine, cold storage, takeaway, manufactured food, celebrity chefs and cooking shows. This food revolution will arise out of fierce demand and resource pressures that are building up in the global food system, coupled with the advent of spectacular new technologies and novel trends in farming, health, recycling and sustainability. Now, today I'm going to make a number of predictions about the future of food based on the current trends and constraints. Many, however, foreshadow magnificent new opportunities for business, investment and careers in this, the age of food. Tonight, around 130,000 people will sit down to dinner, more than sat down last night. By the 2060s, there will be 10 billion mouths to feed. And it's not just babies being born, it's also old folks, like us looking around the room, living longer lives. Did you know that a person in a wealthy country like Western Australia eats 35,000 more meals than someone in a poor country, on average? To meet population growth and economic demand, global food availability must double by the 2060s. However, almost everything that we need to do that by traditional means is running out. Soil, water, nutrients, energy, technology, fish, capital, and a stable, reliable climate. And it is this collision between great demands and great scarcities that makes food the challenge of our age. The multiple stress on food security is not well understood, either by governments or by consumers. Like the Indian blind men in the fable, they see only parts of the beast. This is what science terms a wicked problem. Now, the world is already at or very close to peak water. In China, India, the US and Middle East and North Africa, groundwater is being mined to grow food faster than it replenishes. For example, on the Ogallala Aquifer, it's going to take 6,000 years to put back the water they took out in the last 150. A NASA satellite survey of the world's great groundwater basins reveals that 13 out of 21 are in distress. That is, the groundwater levels are sinking, sometimes as much as by a metre a year. Rainfall in the Great Grain Bowls is becoming less reliable. We know about that. Snowpack on the high mountains that fills the great rivers is shrinking. Lakes, rivers and aquifers in dry lands like Central Asia and so on are vanishing. That's Lake Chad in the bottom left, ladies and gentlemen, 95% gone in just 30 years. And that lake supports 40 million human beings. If nothing changes in how we humans manage our most precious resource, by 2030, our demand for water will outstrip supply by 40%. That's a United Nations statement. To put this in geopolitical perspective, the number of human beings facing acute water stress at least 1 month a year now exceeds 4 billion. It's more than half the Earth's population. Demand for water from the megacities and from the energy sector is likely to double, possibly even triple, by the mid-century. There's only one place they can get that water, from the farmers. Farmers are facing a ferocious battle for their main resource, one that they nearly always lose. By 2060, it is likely we will have to double food output with only half the currently available water. That is a very big ask indeed. If you know anything about agriculture, that's a massive increase in water use efficiency. However, as a water-scarce country, Australia has a comparative advantage from having learned how to manage drought, climatic uncertainty and water in that environment. The art will be to make far more resources available to recycle everything and to eliminate contamination or nutrient losses. So these skills are going to be a primary export from Western Australia in years to come. It's intellectual property rather than actual commodities. As with water, so with soil. Earth scientists estimate we lose 75 billion tonnes of soil every single year. Okay, that's probably a conservative estimate. Most of that is due to farming. The University of Sheffield says that we have shed 1/3 of the world's arable topsoils in the last 40 years. Satellites show that the area of farmland worldwide is shrinking by around 1% a year. Now, if that keeps up for another 50 years, you can imagine how much land is going to be left. So people like Professor Crawford and many others, John Crawford from Sydney University, have warned we could be running out of arable soils within 60 years. The only solution to this is to change how we produce food and also how we reward farmers. The modern diet, ladies and gentlemen, is not healthy. In developed countries such as Australia, 3/4 of people now die by their own hand. That is the hand holding the fork. From a range of chronic degenerative diseases. This is costing our federal budget, for example, $126 billion a year, which is 4 times the defence budget. That's just uncurable diseases. In statistical terms, food is now 6 times more deadly than tobacco. Modern industrial food production worldwide uses 18,000 different chemicals for production, processing and packaging. That's a horrible cocktail, ladies and gentlemen, and that's what comes of importing a lot of food too. But the thing to remember is that food deaths are preventable deaths. And a healthy diet holds the key to preventing disease in our society. At the same time, our insatiable hunger is the chief exterminator of the world's wildlife in the worst extinction event this planet has seen in the last 60 million years. By mid-century, humans will come to dominate half of the Earth's biological productivity, right? That's half of the entire life on the planet will be dedicated to supporting us. And that's going to put our own future on a razor's edge. Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson, I draw to your attention his book, Half Earth, says we are tearing down the biosphere. I don't think the world can sustain this. But you know, there is an answer to this, and I'm going to come to it. By the mid-century, the world's cities will have a population of between 7 and 8 billion people. And they will occupy an area of land the size of China. There will be many cities with 20, even 40 million people. Guangzhou Shenzhen, for example, will have 120 million inhabitants. These great cities have one terrible flaw. They are unlike all the cities of history for this reason. They cannot feed themselves. They rely upon a river of trucks and planes and boats coming every night to restock the shops. Any break in that flow, an oil crisis, a war, a flood or storm, and a giant city of millions of people could starve within days. And we know this happens because in 2011, the Sunshine Coast in Queensland was cut off by floods. The supermarkets were empty, stripped bare within 48 hours. Okay, and the Americans have seen it several times. It's happened in quite a few cities in Asia. The only solution to this is for cities to grow far more of their own food. It's an obvious solution when you think about it. Now, ours is the first generation in human history to throw away half our food. That picture is what the typical Western family throws in the garbage every single month. And half of the efforts of the world's farmers and agricultural scientists now go to landfill. Think about that. This is neither moral, nor economic, nor sustainable. Our food system is founded on a culture of waste. This has to change because world supplies of fertiliser minerals, which underpin the modern food system, will run low, threatening food security in the mid-century. The answer, again the answer, and it's an answer our ancestors knew all about because they had a midden outside the farm door, is to recycle all our waste nutrients back into food production. The world fish catch peaked in 1994. It's actually been going downhill ever since that time. So we're not going to get another 80 million tonnes of fish out of the sea to meet the doubling in world food demand, are we? Visionary solutions are called for, and I'm going to speak some more about those. At the same time, for a quarter of a century, the world's scientific effort in food and agriculture has stagnated. It is now among society's lowest priorities. Look, when I was cutting my teeth in rural journalism, I used to be in and out of the WA Ag department several times a week. It was a buzzing beehive of ideas and active people. I went there a few years ago, and it was like a ghost town. It was a sad place. Same buildings, just about half the number of people there. You know, we are not investing in the very thing that keeps us alive, food, ladies and gentlemen. This is crippling. Crop yield advances and all other forms, sustainable agriculture, the whole lot are feeling the lack of the investment. Look how much investment we're putting into IT and computers or pharmaceuticals, drugs to prop you up once you've got cancer. You know, why not feed people good food to stop them getting cancer? Global investment in food and agricultural science is $50 billion a year, which sounds like a lot. But let me tell you, global investment in new weapons is $1.8 trillion a year. So you might define the human species as a creature that spends 35 times more on better ways to kill one another than we do on better ways to feed one another. I here call for the world to invest 1/10 of its current military spending on new food science and technology, and especially nutrient recycling. To summarise, every meal now served costs the planet 10 kilos of topsoil. That's what your lunchtime sandwich is going to cost. 1.3 litres of oil, 800 litres of water, 1/3 of a gram of pesticide, and 3.5 kilos of carbon dioxide. We are devouring our planet in order to feed ourselves, and that does not seem to me a sensible thing to do. It cannot be sustained. It will not feed a population of 10 billion people in a hot world. It has to change, and it will. The Holocene climate that gave birth to agriculture is extinct. It is never coming back. 2 degrees of global warming are now unavoidable. Possibly 3 are unavoidable at the moment. That's going to make outdoor harvests, whether in the wheat belt of WA or the corn belt of America, extremely unreliable. In India, for example, grain yields could fall by 45%. And that's going to have 1.6 billion people, India. Scientific estimates indicate that without adaptation, 5 degrees of global warming will halve the global food supply, right at the very time we need to double it. Put those two things, those facts together. US soy and corn yields, for example, could drop by between 62 and 83% at those temperatures. This is going to have a huge impact on food and feed prices, food security and availability. It's going to affect every single human being on Earth. The food dimension of climate change will be the biggest personal impact of all. It will drive economics, geopolitics, migration, vast movements of refugees and wars for much of this century. We're already starting to see it. You know, you scrape away what went on in Syria, you get to agriculture. You scrape away what went on in Darfur, in Rwanda, you get to a failure of agriculture. Okay? A lot of wars are triggered by food, land and water issues. So the challenge of feeding the world over the coming century is a very big one, but the opportunities equally are vast. And everywhere I go, I find farmers, scientists, cooks, entrepreneurs reinventing food, how and where it is produced, prepared and sold. Western Australia has all it needs to be a world leader, if not the world leader, in the age of food. You know, someone who grew up here and knowing the originality, the innovation and the drive of our farmers, I would love to see that happen. Now, I'm a little disappointed that WA hasn't taken up the challenge so greatly yet, but I believe you will. Let me explore the opportunities. Solutions to the global food challenge revolve basically around recycling all water and nutrients, all of it, eliminating poisons, health risks and cruelty, transitioning our diet from unsustainable to sustainable, capitalising on spectacular new advances in technology, and moving half our food production back into cities to reuse the water and nutrients that those cities capture. In coming decades, the world diet must shift from one that is predominantly European, that is meat and grains, to one that is predominantly Asian, that is seafood and vegetables. From one that is mainly waste-driven to one that reuses nutrients and water. On this transition, ladies and gentlemen, depends the future of our civilization. Worldwide, smart farmers and businesses are already investing ahead of the curve, and here are some examples. The need to feed the megacities is sparking spectacular growth in urban food production. There are 800 million urban farmers today. I expect that number will double. Modes range from high-tech glass skyscrapers producing vegetables, fruits, small livestock, fish, to large-scale cultivation of fresh foods on urban roofs and walls, to a renaissance in backyard, balcony, private allotment and public food garden production. Aquaponic farms are sprouting from Norway, Iceland, Canada, to America, France, New Zealand and even Australia. In Japan's Kanto rice bowl, for example, there are now 200 large urban farms. A 4,000-acre food park is proposed for the heart of Rotterdam. In Stockholm, government buildings like the top right hand, the tax department forsooth, are going to grow food. So with your tax you also get food. A glass sphere is going up at Linköping in Sweden, an aeroponic farm growing hundreds of tonnes of fresh leafy greens in New Jersey. Smart hospitals are culturing fresh vegetables on the roof to help patients in recovery. Smart restaurants are offering patrons salad greens harvested 15 minutes ago. In Singapore, I love this, top left, elderly retirees are growing their own food in vertical apartment farms. So once they've retired, they become farmers. They stay fit, they stay healthy, they grow their own food. It's a lovely idea. Agritecture, a new food production paradigm, is emerging worldwide from a fascinating blend of agriculture with architecture, art with science. Elaborate structures, specially designed for food production, as well as homes and workplaces, are transforming our thinking about city life. In Australia, Blue Farms, on the left, produces fresh fish and herbs for a major national supermarket chain using conveyor belt aquaponics. I don't say this is the only way to do food, but it's how they're doing it at the moment. Barramundi and those little herbs you get in the plastic boxes. In Norway, Miljøgartneret is producing 2,500 tonnes of fresh tomatoes and peppers off just 7 hectares. So Norway's a pretty harsh climate, so they're doing everything there. The keys to these things are recycling nutrients, water and energy, precision crop feeding. Every single one of those tomato plants has a sensor underneath it that says how much nutrient that plant needs today. And that's all it gets. Right? It gets what it needs, nothing more, nothing less. Zero or low use of chemicals. I mean, they breed their own bumblebees, for heaven's sake, in order to pollinate the crop. They breed their own wasps to control aphids and things like that. Now, these types of farms are backed by a growing network of online retailers supplying consumers and restaurants with same-day fresh produce direct. I mean, we're infested with them in Canberra. I take it you are too. Here, there's always people ringing up and wanting to drop a box of veggies on your doorstep. Technical advances in hydroponics, aeroponics and aquaponics are offering new ways to produce high yields of fresh, nutritious food from a fraction of the land area, water or energy use of traditional farming systems. Now, social media are seething with these new ideas. I mean, if you're part of this revolution, you'll be seeing these new ideas by the dozen every single day, if you're hooked into the right people on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. As land prices soar, farming is taking to the sea, combining the old Aztec idea of floating farms with modern 20th century solar and desalination technology to grow fresh vegetables as well as fish on high-tech floating platforms. And this is going to help to feed those cities that are right on the coast and which are perhaps remote from agricultural areas. Places like Mumbai, Singapore, Shanghai, San Francisco, possibly even Perth. The looming crisis in arable soils and water is going to be solved in the same way, by solar desal and hydroponic systems in desert regions like Western China, North India, the Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia. In South Australia, Sundrop Farms is proving the concept using sunshine to desalinate salty groundwater and grow crops of tomatoes year-round in a climate-proof setting. Living in a high-rise apartment is no longer a barrier to being a farmer, as Australian journalist Indira Naidu, bottom right, has shown. Microfarms are taking off worldwide as urbanites rediscover the joy, the satisfaction and the health benefits of raising their own crops and livestock. Microfarms range from the hippie to the hipster, from the dazzlingly high-tech, and even supermarkets are now starting to install them. Right-hand side. For the style-conscious urban farmer, IKEA offers you this attractive green sphere down the bottom. These are going to generate a huge demand for agricultural knowledge and technical skills. And both of them, the farm sector, if it stays with the game, is perfectly placed to supply them. So you don't just have to grow sheep and wheat, you can actually sell knowledge as well. United Nations is promoting insects as food around the world, but especially in Asia, they are expanding quite rapidly. Now, if you don't like the idea of eating insects, you don't have to. You can feed them to the trout, you can feed them to the ducks, you can feed them to the chickens or whatever else it is that you eat. They are very, very good for recycling wasted nutrients. All that food that gets thrown away from the supermarkets and the restaurants could be used to feed blowflies or whatever, something else anyway. A major milestone in the future of food was the 2013 production by Maastricht University of the world's first test tube sausage, followed shortly after by the world's first hamburger grown from animal stem cells. Now, that hamburger cost $350,000, so it's not going to appear in McDonald's anytime soon, but appear it will, okay? Cultured meat is real meat, but it uses far less soil, water, fertiliser, energy, chemicals and carbon. It is potentially healthier and safer to eat because you can exclude the undesirable things and leave in the good things. It's potentially a lot cheaper to the consumer, and it is cruelty-free to both farmers and animals. It just never went moo. It is ideal for urban production. Look, I think that by the 2030s you are going to be seeing this stuff at the bottom end of the meat market as filler for pies, sausages, snack foods and so on. I don't claim it's going to compete with real, steak, but it's going to be a big factor in the food supply and in supermarkets keeping the price of food down to consumers. There are already, I should say, henless eggs, pigless bacon, chookless nuggets, and fishless fish. Okay, these things are all coming. And if you don't think it's going to catch on, just look at your clothes. When I started reporting about agriculture, nobody wore synthetic clothing. Today, everybody wears synthetic clothing. Everybody has got something synthetic about their persons. So, this is possibly what's going to happen with synthetic meat. Biocultures, which are very similar, are going to transform food production. And again, this is another way of reprocessing or recycling waste nutrients. We've used cell culture in agriculture, agricultural science, for decades, and likewise in medical science. But it's now emerging at the industrial scale, the big silver vat bioreactor it's called, and you can culture food made from fungal cells, plant cells, microbial cells, animal cells, you name it. You can produce an awful lot of protein on a very, very small footprint with these things, turned into edible, and you can probably count on the food industry to ensure that they're delicious as well. Even though it might start out tasting like Soylent or whatever that stuff is called, they will do something to it to make it interesting. And I'm not advocating for these things, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just telling you what's coming down. Importantly, these new foods can be tailored to the dietary needs of individuals. So if your genetic profile says you are prone to heart disease or prone to diabetes, you can be eating the right food from an early age to prevent that disease. So these things, we need the nutritionists engaged in this thing very, very heavily. Now, believe it or not, our civilization subsists on just 200 different plants. Okay, that's if you count broccoli and cabbage and it's all the same thing, plant. It relies mainly on 5 grains and 5 animals. And yet, according to Bruce French, an agronomist from Tasmania, there are at least 27,000 edible plant species in our world. And adverting to the welcome to country, there are 6,100 edible plants in Australia. How many do we actually eat? 5 on a regular basis, ladies and gentlemen. 5 out of 6,100. The knowledge about these foods is indigenous worldwide, and it is very fragile, and it will be gone soon. So we have to get onto it very quickly. Many of these foods are extremely healthy. They have very good profiles. The Asian bitter melon, which you've probably seen, that can do more for your diabetes than any drug they can give you. So I'm told by a diabetes expert. So these vegetables are one of the answers to the chronic diseases that are killing us now. Intensively produced fruits and vegetables in boundless diversity will form the mainstay of the future global diet. They will produce new industries and jobs. They offer huge potential for urban and intensive food systems. So, green cities, alive with vegetation, fresh food, birds and insects, will replace the polluted, soulless, windy, concrete and glass urbanscapes of today. I think of that because I've watched Perth do that to itself over the years. These cities will recycle all their water and organic waste back into sustainable food production. Their food supply will be climate-proof, unaffected by the shocks that will hammer traditional broadacre outdoor farming. They will ensure a highly diverse local food supply that never fails. By mid-century, with the right investment, urban production can supply half of the world's food. Now, aquaculture already grows a third of the world's seafood, but a culinary explosion is on the way. This is going to yield a diet that is kinder to the planet, more resilient to the climate, healthier and more delicious for the consumer, and more diverse and rewarding for the producer and the chef, and less costly to taxpayers too. Worldwide, aquaculture now produces 70 million tonnes of fish and water plants a year, but this is a fraction of its potential. By the mid-century, it will be producing 4 or 5 times that volume, at least. But how are we going to feed all these fish? if we're running out of grain. To do so, to feed all the animals that we're going to have to feed by mid-century, we're going to have to discover 3 more North Americas to grow the grain to feed the animals. So it's not going to work, is it? Where is the food going to come from? Well, the answer is there. It's going to come from Western Australia to a large degree. The answer is algaepreneurs, the pioneers of the industry of water plant cropping. In future, farms of micro and macroalgae will produce food for people, feed for fish and other animals, fuel for transport, pharmaceuticals, plastics, textiles, and fine chemicals. They will produce your T-shirt. They, in turn, will be nourished by the flood of organic waste from the world's cities. 30 countries are now already pursuing this opportunity. Well, we've got 8 companies in Australia that are doing this, and you've been growing algae up for special uses up near Geraldton for 30, 40 years. Algae can be farmed in tanks or ponds on wasteland, in salt lakes. I look at all those salt lakes in the back of the wheat belt there and wonder. In shipping containers, in floating rafts and plastic bags in the ocean, where they do not compete for space with other crops of food or with wilderness. They are resilient to climate change because water temperatures doesn't vary as much as air temperature varies. They can be integrated into urban food production to cleanse wastewater. And we're looking at using algae to actually clean the runoff from the land to protect the Great Barrier Reef. Because it's not just climate that's killing the reef, it's also nutrients. So we somehow need to capture those nutrients before they hit the lagoon. There are 72,000 species of algae on this planet that we know so far, so there's a lot of choice for would-be algae farmers. Many of them contain useful things like omega-3 and omega-6 oils, beta-carotene, and so on, which are essential to health. They can be made into delicious and sustainable foods as readily as any land crop. Biofuels from algae could meet the entire transport supply from an area of 57 million hectares. In fact, one sheep station in Western Australia would supply all of Australia's liquid transport fuels if it was producing algae. You've got enough sunshine in the Pilbara to do that. This is the green renewable solution to the risk of global oil shocks, global oil supplies, etc., etc. It'll cut carbon emissions by roughly 20%. WA has the sunlight, the space and the salt water, which are the essential resources for algae farming. Potentially it is a world leader. Now, traditional farms will still supply about a third of the world or half the world's food, but they will be eco-farms, as we were discussing before, avoiding chemicals, storing carbon, protecting soil and water, as well as conserving wildlife and wilderness. They will, in many cases, be planned and managed by artificial intelligence, worked by robots and drones. It's going to be a different place on Old MacDonald's farm. They will produce elite quality food, and the farmers will be rewarded with much higher prices for sustainable food than they currently are able to get from today's commodities. Now, growing half our food in cities will bring immense relief to the stress on the world's soils, water, wildlife and rural communities. For the first time, humanity will be able to feed itself without plundering the natural world. This will pave the way for the regeneration of grasslands, forests, rural landscapes and communities, the rewilding of half the earth and the recovery of its imperilled wildlife that E.O. Wilson has proposed. Instead of chucking farmers off their land, which is what we're doing at the moment by screwing the prices down on them, society will begin to pay them as stewards of the earth, as well as producers of high quality, valuable, sustainable eco-food. This new approach to food production will enable humanity to set aside 24 million square kilometres. That's an area the size of North America. And to curb the 6th extinction. Finally, we cannot have a healthy, sustainable food system unless we also have consumers who are able to make the right choices for themselves and for the planet. It is they who send the dollar signals that will make all of this happen or we'll sabotage it. So we need a year, a full year, a food year in every junior school on the planet to teach today's young citizens a new respect for food. A year in which every subject, maths, language, geography, science, society and sport, is taught through the lens of food. How precious it is, how it is produced, where it comes from, how to eat safely, thriftily, healthily, enjoyably and sustainably. Teaching food is acceptable to all creeds and cultures. The means already exist to share these ideas universally via social media and the internet. We just have to make it go faster. Ladies and gentlemen, just as the 70s were the age of rock and roll, the 90s were the age of the internet, we are entering the age of food. Never has world cuisine been so spectacularly diverse or so far short of its true potential. Never have the opportunities been so great or so many. Western Australia, with its expertise in farming, sustainability, waste and water management, has the skills and the technology to lead a worldwide revolution in food choices, novel production systems, healthy diets, renewable urban food, in the ideas economy, and in ending the sixth extinction. Food is one of the most creative acts which we humans perform. How well we do it will define the future of our civilization, now and forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. Amazing and scary at the same time. We do have some time for questions, and we've got Peter with a roving mic. So if anyone's got a question, everyone's brave enough to ask the first question of the day, that would be very much appreciated. If you just maybe say your name and organisation, that would be great. Anyone? Yep. Fantastic. We've got one there and one over here. Great. We'll just hang on with the mic, just come over just one sec.
My name's Leela. I'm here from WACOS, WA Council of Social Service. That was awesome. I'm going home to change everything.
Good.
Going forward, I often think about, we probably have a lot of leaders in the room. There are going to be people that have less access to nutritious food. The last slide really pointed it out for me, is that learning how to use food and enjoy food is something usually learned through community. If you're socially isolated from community, you're not necessarily going to have the understanding on how to cook the food and how to enjoy the food and how to make the food important, although it would be amazing if this was part of school community, and I get that because that's probably the only way you can have access to all of the children. I just hope that there's innovations along the way so that we can ensure that the socially isolated, the intergenerationally disadvantaged come along on this food journey with us.
Yes, absolutely. This is not just a yuppie thing. Let me stress that. Stephanie Alexander has a food program in hundreds, it used to be 300, it's now about 400 schools around Australia, where the kids grow their own and they prepare their own. One of the interesting things from this is that once kids get their hands on the food, as producers and things like that, they eat their Brussels sprouts, okay? So all of the foods that kids traditionally shun, if they grow them themselves, they will eat them. Teachers who teach this stuff tell me that the bad kids who are at the back of the class that every teacher warns you about, the ones who probably are not, academically that brilliant, and so they sit at the back and disrupt. Once they get something that they can do with their hands, something practical, they get engaged. They like it. It's something they can do. There's no competition like there is in maths or geography or something. So it's engaging all sorts of people with different levels of skill, and I think that that's going to address... And the other thing that's happening is that the kids are going to go home and they're going to say to their mother, I want fresh orange juice. I don't want that stuff with the chemicals in it, And they are. So the kids are educating the parents. So if we have this, a year of food in every school in Western Australia, maybe 2 years actually, just to, so that kids who play sport, they're only ever going to play football in their lives kind of thing, they learn where their energy comes from and how to get a balanced diet and not grow fat at the end of their football career and things like that. So, I think there's a great deal of opportunity. Also, the farmers' markets and the small voluntary organisations, I'm sure Costa can say more about this, around Australia are bringing in people who are from the lower socio-economic quartiles and things like that. They're engaging them. This is something that anybody can do. It's a job for people who don't want to work in an office or a factory. Growing food is a very honourable profession. Lots of people love doing it. It's a wonderful pastime. Thank you.
We've got time for one more question. So we had a hand up just down the first up. I think the lady behind you was first, I'm afraid, so we're going to go to first in best dressed. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kirsty Bayliss from Murdoch University. Right the way through your talk, you said we need to double food production. Why do we need to do that when we are wasting so much? I mean, it is anywhere up to 50% of our food is being lost or wasted. Why are we not tackling that issue, given that if we could reduce that waste, we wouldn't need to double food production?
I quite agree. The amount of food that is wasted would feed 3 billion human beings, and there's only about 815 million who are actually malnourished in the world today. But that food tends to stay wherever it was produced, in North America or Europe or somewhere like that. Nobody wants to pay for it to be shared. So the problem is, if you're going to recycle the nutrients, you're going to recycle the nutrients in the countries that are already food surplus. They're not actually going to. We have to transfer these new technologies, and they are, to places like Africa, the south of India and things like that. Yes, I agree with you completely. We can do much less agriculture if we start recycling our food better. I think we are probably committed to, because of the high quality that supermarkets and the marketing insist upon, there is going to be a large wastage. But the supermarkets don't want, most of them don't want, I will correct myself, some of them are already recycling. They don't want to spend money on that just yet because they don't see the profit in it. But once the recycling industry starts to become the fertiliser industry for the urban farming system, then the whole value chain starts to alter a bit, and it becomes more profitable to put money into recycling. That's what's not happening at the moment. If we create an algae farming industry, for example, the algae will consume an enormous amount of nutrients. So there will be instead of throwing things in a hole in the ground, instead of piping them off Swanbourne Beach, which we're doing at the moment, we need to recycle, bring all those nutrients back because they're precious. Right? No new ones are being made. There's a finite amount of nutrients on the planet. If we just use the ones we've got over and over, then we have a sustainable system.
Thank you very much, Julian. That's an enlightening presentation. Thank you.